Welcome to Seymour's World. I'm Seymor Kazimirski. Today we are opening minds and facilitating conversations. I want to give a little reference to last week's show where we had Rachel Glanstein on. I have to say I learned what a parliamentarian does, and so did many of you. A lot of you sent me emails that you had no idea what that job really means. So she did a great job, and I think it was wonderful to have her on board. I also want you to know that I just did a commentary. This was called Do It Today. And I did this because of what happened to Robin Williams. I just felt this morning that I wanted to say something to all of you and to myself that we have to do what we want to do today because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So let's get on with today's show. Today's show is called The World According to Us. And why is it that way? Because we have as my guest, my esteemed colleague, Jay Fidell. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Seymour. Nice to be here with you.
Well, every time we do this, we laugh a lot, we smile a lot, and we think that we can save the world and solve most of its problems.
Oh boy, it's a tall order.
It is a very, very difficult thing, but you and I have had so many conversations about it, and I just feel that it's good to argue and to discuss and not be afraid to be a contrarian and to talk about different issues that are affecting all of us today. And I think the first issue that I'd like to talk about is the Israeli-Gaza situation. Mm-hmm. As you know, I had a show on the Israeli-Gaza situation that probably was my highest rated show because it went out to thousands of people. I couldn't believe how many responses I got, most of them extremely positive from my perspective, from what I believed was right. But I did have a few naysayers who felt that I was wrong. And today we are so lucky because just before this show, I tuned in and the ceasefire is still on between Gaza and Israel. But what does that mean in your mind?
You know, we had a show among hosts a couple of years ago with Rafi Boritzer, and he's very knowledgeable about this. He's not here in Hawaii right now. He'll be back in a couple of weeks, and we should continue the conversation with him. Rafi's the 3 o'clock spot on Monday. Anyway, he told me, and I didn't know, you have to understand the Middle East. It's different. And, you know, it's like the laws of physics. They're immutable, but only in the Western Hemisphere, only in the developed nations. When you take the Middle East, the laws of physics are different. The laws, the way people get along, the way they feel about other people, sort of the, one tribe versus another tribe concept, it's different there. And he told me about Turkey. I don't know if you know this, but Turkey is the capstone on the Middle East. It was the great power for a long time. And still today, it has great influence. It's a Western nation in the Middle East, in the Middle Eastern nations, and somehow it always has relevance. It always has some implication, Turkey, and everything that happens. You didn't know that. He's very knowledgeable, so I accept it. But I think the truce, like so many other truces, it will go on for a while. It might even ripen into a long-term truce, but it's only a truce. It'll happen again and again. The forces underneath will bring us to this brink again and again. It's the way it is. And the question is not so much how each truce, how each breaking of the truce comes about, or how the truce comes about, because that's just like a sine curve. It's an iteration that's going to continue, in my view. The question is, what's the larger evolution? Are the wars between truces going to be more violent? Are the truces going to be longer, shorter, more permanent, or less? We have to look down the road, and we have to look to history to see what's going to happen here. It's not going to. It will continue, but it's not going to be the same. Is that a good answer for you?
No, it's actually not acceptable because we need to have a solution to the problem. And obviously, one side solution, if I may take the side of Hamas, is we don't believe that Israel should exist. And our whole goal is to destroy Israel. If that is their solution and their whole thought process, as an example, those tunnels they built were not for subterranean subways. Those tunnels were built for only one reason, and that's to get into Israel and to make sure they kill as many people as they can. I understand capture children and soldiers, and I understand there were handcuffs underneath and tranquilizers and thousands of armaments down below. So they had a plan, and this was not a plan hatched yesterday. This has been in effect for a long period of time. So we understand that that's their goal. That's what they want. In effect, if I were to make the definition of peace from the Hamas point of view, that would be peace. Peace would be for
destroy
them
Israel.
The annihilation of
that's
Israel.
Peace.
That's
Yeah.
peace,
For them.
right?
Yeah.
And they're teaching that to their children.
Yes, they are.
And they're teaching it, their friends all agree with them. Even some of my best friends, after my last commentary on the Israel-Gaza solution, disagreed with me. They didn't think that that really was what Hamas wanted. From the Israeli side, what we hear is peace for them is a simple ability to live alongside a neighbor and trust the neighbor, similar to Egypt, similar to Jordan. It doesn't mean that you have to love thy neighbor. It means you have to be able to live with your neighbor. And I don't see a solution today except for getting rid of Hamas and maybe getting the West Bank people in to govern Gaza again, or get somebody else to govern Gaza who wants peace. That, to me, is the only way. Otherwise, we're destined to do exactly what you say.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we actually agree on this. I mean, it's an impossible thing to solve because one side would like to be left alone. The Israelis just leave them alone. They're happy enough. And the other side has to destroy Israel. And so those two notions really cannot coexist. Those two notions do not result in peace. And something you said, but other people, Netanyahu has said it, we have to destroy Hamas. But the problem is, and this is a serious problem, I don't know if you saw the footage. I don't know the news agency that put this on, the global networks, but there was footage of the people in Hamas, in the cities, after the truce. And they were celebrating and shooting guns in the air and saying, death to Israel, and extolling Hamas. The people in the streets, thousands, millions of them, extolling Hamas. It's not as if anything happened here to separate, Hamas from the people and have the people have less confidence in Hamas or less likely to, quote, vote for them next time around. I think Hamas is ingrained deeply in Gaza and the people of Gaza.
I think they are as well. I think from the point of view of international view of the situation, we are seeing two different stories. We're seeing the story of these people being it's a terrible situation. Nobody wants to see children killed, except Hamas wants to see the Israeli children killed. But nobody wants to see what's happening in Gaza. But this is the first time I have felt that more and more people are starting to understand what you call the historical issue of that area. We have people living next to each other who really don't like each other. And they one side believes one thing, the other side believes another thing. Jay, we have not come up with a solution. Because I think you're right. I think Hamas, we're not going to be able to get rid of Hamas if the people are willing to die under the Hamas leadership. If they stand up and they say, we're tired of this, we've had enough of this war, just like we've seen other dictatorships and autocrats in Libya and in Iraq, and where the people start to say, we don't want any more of this. If that happens, then maybe there's a chance.
Well, I don't know if that's going to happen, Seymour. I said the laws of physics are different in the Middle East. Well, in the Middle East, people don't necessarily look for peace. I mean, people in Gaza are not necessarily looking for peace. And the notion of putting your wife or your child or your family up as a shield, that is an outrage to everyone in the world except in Gaza for Hamas. That's what they do, and the people understand this, and they go along with it, and they stay there. They take the advice to stay where the bombs are going to come, where everyone knows the bombs are going to come. And it's almost like blowing yourself up. It's what it is.
You're right.
It's that notion. The laws of physics are different. Now, you can say, oh, that's terribly offensive, but what has happened, and this is, I think we must discuss this, what has happened is that people don't accept the Israeli explanation of what is happening. They don't accept the notion of human shield. They think there must be some terrible thing going on where the Israelis want to kill children and women and civilians, which isn't really the case. And I mean, what's happened is the notion of the different systems, the different physics, has been set aside. There are, all over the college campuses of this country, there are people who are demonstrating against the Israelis. They do not have a clue about what is really going on.
Let's face it, ignorance is bliss. So if you are truly ignorant of a total situation and you're only looking at one, which in our world, unfortunately, introspection is a soundbite. It's 10 seconds, it's 15 seconds. The news networks, you've heard me say this in the past when I was in Thailand, and how everybody was thinking that Thailand was, at war, when actually it was very peaceful demonstrations. But the news, when the news cameras came up, everybody had their signs up and they were shouting and screaming and ranting and raving. But in effect, it was a peaceful protest. What the students that you're seeing or that you're talking about are seeing 10 seconds. And what do they see? Children crying and screaming and dead bodies. I don't blame them. I blame the media for not truly trying to show people the big picture.
I blame the teachers. They're students,
or
by definition.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be becoming worldly. They're supposed to understand, investigate these things. I mean, I find it extraordinary that A, the media doesn't do its job, and B, the teachers don't do their job. I mean, if they're going to be in college teaching civilization, don't you think they should cover this? And don't you think they should explain? Instead, what you have, it's like this huge brush fire of misinformation. Not only here, but I mean, I spoke to a young woman yesterday with whom I did not get into an argument. I probably should have. And she said she was in Canada recently, in Vancouver, and there was a big demonstration against the murderous Israelis. And she said to me, there ought to be more demonstrations like that here. Well, there have been a couple here in Hawaii. Mm-hmm. I mean, really, you got to make a note about who's doing that. But she wanted there to be more demonstrations like that. And this is a woman with a college degree, but it's an imperfect college degree. She doesn't have a clue. And I don't know how we fix that. I don't think the Israelis go out of their way to do PR, and try to counterbalance the PR that's coming in against them. I wish they would. Maybe it's up to you and me. Somebody has to tell people how the laws of physics work in the Middle East.
It's true. Let's go to another subject.
Let's go to one other thing that's related to this,
Okay.
which I made a note that I wanted to tell you about.
Okay.
Ukraine. Okay. The Russians have this humanitarian mission that's now supposed to go inside Ukraine.
500 trucks.
Yeah, but P.S., is that really humanitarian, or is it, a sheep in a wolf in sheep's clothing, a Helen of Troy kind of thing, where all of a sudden it's not humanitarian at all, and there's an attack from the humanitarian mission, or as a result, or some concocted altercation resulting, in real attack. So this fellow has written a book. Moorhead is his name. It's about to come out, and it was reviewed on NPR this morning. And it's a book about the really bizarre similarities between what's happening in Ukraine now and what happened in Ukraine in the 30s. The Russians did the same thing in Ukraine in the 30s, right down to the humanitarian mission. You could take this book and change the dates, and you'd have what we're doing right now. History does repeat itself. Nobody knows. That's why my little thing about amnesia. I don't know if you saw it, but if you don't study history, you will repeat it, and the worst parts of it. And I think what's happening in Ukraine is a repetition of something that happened not only before, or rather in the beginning of World War II, but something that happened in the 1800s, the 1900s under the Tsars. They were grabbing territory, and their techniques haven't changed at all.
Well, the situation in the Ukraine is very, very complex, because you do have people in the Ukraine that were Russians and prefer to be part of Russia. It's so complex that you remember Fanny Wedrow? We had her on a
Yeah,
show,
sure.
and she's from the Ukraine, and we talked about it at length. And she said to me, Seymour, you don't understand. They want to be part of Russia because they get more out of being part of Russia than being part of the Ukraine. Very complex situation. We don't have enough time to discuss it today. Let's move to Iraq and what's happening now, and the U.S. coming in and trying to help. What's your position on that?
Position? There's many issues. Which issue?
Let's take the first issue of President Obama deciding that he was going to help that religious faction. There's, I think, 10 or 20,000 of them on a mountainside, and he wants to be able to give them food and to protect them. He's going to do some it's called target bombing, pinpoint bombing of the ISIS or ISIL group.
With drones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Not just with drones. He's using manned aircraft.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, he is.
Yeah. Go ahead. What's your position on that?
Whether he should have done it or not,
Yes.
I think he should have done it. My feeling, and my feeling is a recent feeling, because I felt before, I felt that it was best for the U.S. to, pull out. But I believed at the time I felt that, and I think a lot of people did, that things were okay. They weren't great, but they were okay. They were under control. Come to find, they were not under control. I mean, even as he's bombing the hilltop, the guys in Baghdad are decompensating. The government is falling apart. They can't agree on the simplest thing. I mean, it's a tragedy with two ends to it. I mean, I don't know how this bombing is going to, provide for an environment of political stability when there is no possibility of political stability. I mean, the point is, if we are going to be the leaders of the world, like it or not, I guess we do have to go out and try to be the world's policeman. But we have to be very smart about it.
We are going to take a short break, Jay, but I'm going to leave you with this question, and to our viewers also. Do you want your sons and daughters to go over there? Let's take a quick break.
Hello, I'm Martin Despang, and I'm the host together with the one and only Ali Amashta, and our show is called Urban Transcendence. And urban transcendence is about identifying where we have a unique situation of a vibrant city in one of the most beautiful natural environments. So how these two can coincide, sometimes conflict, how they could find reciprocity in the 21st century is what we're excited about. And we're planning on bringing in a diverse body of guests, both from the arts and the science and the established and the wise and the emerging generation. So hope you will join us. We'll always be on Thursdays from 1 to 2 p.m. Thank you.
Welcome back to Seymour's World. I'm Seymor Kazimirski. My guest today is Jay Fidell.
Happy to be here, Seymour.
And Jay, it's so good to do this because we need to discuss more rather than talk and lecture. It's important for people to hear different points of view. So the last question
You didn't want any of our sons and daughters going over in the military.
Well, wait, but let's frame the question. The question was, in the current circumstance, after we've pulled out and we saw what kind of a job we did in the last 10 years and how many lives we lost, how many of our own sons and daughters have been hurt, what was the result of all that? Do we want to do it again?
Oh, we should not do what we did before again. It goes back to George Santayana. You have to understand and remember history and not repeat it. What we did before was ineffectual. It was ineffectual and, misguided when George Bush went in there. George Bush II, and it was ineffectual when Obama stayed in there and eased himself out in such a way to leave a crumbling country or countries. How could we do that in two separate places? Similar mistakes. I think we have to get much smarter. And if we're going to go back in any way, we have to be much smarter on how we deal with the people on the ground. Extraordinary that our troops couldn't speak the language. They had no specific understanding of the culture. We had no plan on dealing with, bringing the people across to our way of thinking. No plan at all. It was just a kind of physical force badly executed.
You didn't answer
and
my
we can't
question.
do that again.
Okay.
We can't do that again. If we do it again, and we should discuss whether we ever should, now or ever, if we do it again, it has to be much smarter. We have to go back to what happened and learn.
The attitude that we have, that we are the world's policeman, is a very important point. Because are we the world's policeman? Should we be the world's policeman? My personal feeling after what I saw in this morning's cartoon in the Star Advertiser was amazing. There was a picture that said, Saddam Hussein, please come back. That was pretty amazing because they had such a much better life under that type of leadership. And we can't fool ourselves to think that we have the answers in our own democracy or in our own democratic methods to say that if we teach you how to live your life, you will live a better life. It's not necessarily so.
Well, you remember George Bush, he was going to show him democracy. He didn't know what he was talking about. Yale isn't always effective either. Sorry. And so we didn't realize, he didn't realize, and the country following him didn't realize how ineffective all of that was. You can't go in and show people who have had thousands of years of non-democracy, how to be democratic virtually overnight. That doesn't work. But, what's happening now with ISIS is the most extraordinary thing. It's sweeping across boundaries, Seymour. I mean, it has the potential of reaching into every part of the Muslim world, into every part of the Muslim civilization by force, by murder. I mean, we're going back into a kind of dark age and fast. Don't you think the U.S. should do something about that?
The question that I would have, and I want to answer the question, but the question that I want to have is ISIS a threat? Are they a true threat to the United States? Remember, we have had several wars from Vietnam on, if you want to look at it, Vietnam, I mean, the last 2-3 wars, they've been disasters. Why? Because we don't understand the people that we're trying to help. And in essence, the purview of the CIA and the FBI and all our Homeland Security is protect U.S. borders, protect U.S. people. If we continue to fight, pardon me?
Hard to do that.
Very hard to do. But if we continue to do what we have done so well since 9/11 here at home, and we can protect our people, do we belong over there? Where is the European Union? Where is Germany, France, England? Who else is saying, let's go and get rid of ISIS? Why? Why aren't they standing beside us anymore? Why are they letting us be the world's policeman? Should we be the world's policeman?
You remember Robert Mitchum?
The actor, of course.
Yeah. And he was with Ali McGraw in the series that went on and on. It was one of those early series on television, on cable it was. It was called Winds of War.
Sure, yeah.
And I remember watching that with some interest because it was, it was an examination of how the world was devolving before World War, and how you could, World War II, and how you could feel it coming. You could feel the winds coming. And you know what?
That's what you feel about ISIS? You think that ISIS is trying to take over the world, or are they trying to just take over that portion of the world that is their Muslim section, which would be Syria, you're right, Iraq, you're right. I don't think they'll go after Saudi Arabia. I don't think they'll go after Qatar. I don't think they'll go after a lot of the other surrounding areas. But are they big enough or strong enough or financially independent enough to stretch beyond the area that they want to do?
I want to talk about that. But first, this thought, though. So Winds of War talked about all these things sort of devolving around Europe and Asia, for that matter. And you could sort of smell a bad odor in the air. People were in a globally bad mood. And the same thing happened in World War I. If you remember the Guns of August, Barbara Tuchman wrote it up, day by day, about how all the countries in Europe had war plans ready to execute, and it became an automated execution. Somebody did something wrong, well, the war plan triggered this, and then the other war plan triggered that, and before you know it, we were all at war. And we couldn't stop it. We, meaning everyone, couldn't stop it because they all had war plans that were, that were in play. Okay, so I think that sometimes in the world we forget about the last big war, we forget about all the damage and destruction, and we get into a bad mood and bad things happen. And there's a lot of really outrageous things happening these days. I just want to make that point. It's happened before World War I, World War II, and I believe it's happening now. I mean, I can't remember a time, you know, when you read the paper and there's so many bad things happening, really bad things. As for ISIS, you know, if you ask me hard, is ISIS really a threat? I'd say, well, you know, the media is like really whipping it up on ISIS, and they're telling us that ISIS is a threat. They're telling us that ISIS is going to, you know, be worse than Al Qaeda, and come here to this country and blow things up and do worse things because they're more bloodthirsty and all that. But query, can an organization, I'm going to put one on you now, I think I know how you're going to answer, can an organization that uses threat and murder and forced religion or death is what they do, can an organization like that prevail, even in a culture that might accept part of it? Is what ISIS doing going to be accepted by the people in the countries, the regions that they would like to rule? Can they pull it off? You know, I mean, it sounds like World War II, actually. Can they pull it off with millions of people? Can they subjugate millions of people over any continued period of time? I don't know the answer, but I think there's a real question there.
I don't think any of us really know the answer, but I think before I answer, I want you to remember the two words that you said, the media has. Just the media has. Media has given us so many extraneous thoughts as fact when they really have no basis in fact. We don't know what ISIS is capable of, but the media, in their requirement for drama, in their requirement to make us watch more and more TV, have told us that ISIS can do that. The generals in the military are like surgeons in the medical field. What do surgeons want to do? They want to cut, right? They want to operate. So their first thought process is operate. What do generals want to do? They want to fight because that's what they're taught to do. So they want to fight. So the generals...
That's got to change.
No kidding. So the generals on both the Republican side and the Democrat side, and guys like McCain, they have their fists pumped up in the air. Let's go get them. Let's go get them. Jay, we've done that too much. It's much, much too much. The last few wars have caught us, or they've given us a requirement of laissez-faire. They're making us say, wait a second, maybe we should let things happen over there. Maybe that's what the United Nations is for. That's what NATO is for. What about their European neighbors? Why aren't they stepping into the fray to help these people up on the mountain? We're the only guys out there. We're coming from the United States. It goes back to your policemen, you know, the world's policemen. It goes back to what is our role in the United States to do? Should we take a step back from the warmongering and say to ourselves, wait a sec, let's help people that truly need help when it comes to food, humanitarian aid, whether it's Africa,
soft power.
Exactly, Middle East, etc.
And we
but
do
the
that.
war, yes, and I believe we should do that. And I believe the world should do that. But do I believe, so your question is, can ISIS be a true threat to the United States? Today, I say no. But I also say we should not get involved in another sectarian war because ISIS is truly a sect, just like the Shiites and the Sunnis and all the other guys out there. It's a sect, and I don't think we should get involved in a war.
Well, boots on the ground is really asking for trouble. And I mean, he's smart enough, you know, not to want to do that. But, you know, the problem is we're being drawn in anyway, and people are getting more excited about it, and there's a fever going on. It's that winds of war thing. I'm looking at a larger picture, though, Seymour. Over time, I think that Obama, maybe the whole system, has been ineffective in dealing with this. We should know the language. We should know the culture. We should be expert. We should be there. We should have a presence. We should do humanitarian things. We should do diplomacy. You know, what did Hillary Clinton, you know, she's disagreeing with him already because he's been wimpy. And we can't be wimpy. You don't have to go out and beat somebody with a baton to be the world's policeman. You just have to, you know, take world responsibility. So Europe is never going to be out there. We're the ones. We're the ones, the reserve currency. We're the ones who, you know, won World War II. We did a lousy job in Korea. We did a lousy job in Vietnam. We did a lousy job in Jamaica, for God's sake.
And Afghanistan.
And Afghanistan
and Iraq.
and Iraq and you name it. because we don't have it together. And I think our military people ought to be more diplomatic, and I think there ought to be better policies all along the way. Otherwise, it's fits and starts. That's what we've done since the Second World War. We got to do better than that. But I think we have an ethical, humanitarian, obligation as the leader of the world. And if we don't abide by that, we will no longer be the leader of the world, and we are in great risk. It's not so much that we go in and get into a mess over things. If we go in smart and solve problems, we will continue to have world leadership. If we don't go in, don't solve problems, be ineffective, one of these days you're going to see it. The U.S. currency will no longer be the reserve currency. We will be a second-class power. This could happen soon. And I'm not saying that violence is the answer to that, but I'm saying we have to take responsibility.
I agree with you and I disagree with you.
That's good.
But we don't have, again, time to
That's good.
further this, but we will do it a little bit later. We're going to take a short break, and then we're going to talk about Hawaii politics and what just happened this week.
God, what a show.
I'm Seymour Kazimirski at Seymour's World. We'll be back in a minute with Jay Fidell.
I'm Hong Jiang, host for Asia in Review on Tuesdays.
And I'm David Day, host for Asian Review on Thursdays. Both of us broadcast our respective shows at 4 p.m.
And my topics tend to deal with questions related to environment, culture, history, and sometimes human rights.
And my shows tend to be on international business, foreign policy, geopolitics, and national security. And you can watch our shows live on the ThinkTech website at thinktechhawaii.com.
And you can also watch us on YouTube or Olalo.
So come join us on Thursdays at 4 p.m. I'm David Day.
And on Tuesdays at 4 p.m., I'm Hong Jiang.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Hi, welcome back to Seymour's World. I'm Seymour Kazimirski. I'm laughing because Jay and I have been fighting through the break. And of course, he ended up just before I came on air with the terms, "Of course I'm right." Well, of course, I can't argue with him anymore about that part, but we've come to the last segment of our show, and I hope we're going to be able to continue this at a later date. Let's talk about Hawaii and Hawaii's politics. What happened between Ige and Abercrombie, and what happened with our friend Brian Schatz and Colleen Hanabusa. What an amazing election. I could not have believed it. Did you think that Ige was going to win?
Yes,
You
but
did?
not by that margin.
And why do you think he won by such a large margin?
This is a really, really, really important question. And there's probably a number of factors. We don't have a lot of time, so this is the one we should focus on, okay? Because this is where it really surprised everybody, what kind of a landslide that was. I think one thing is, Ige's organization, although at the beginning it was not all that well organized, by the end, it was better organized, and they worked their buns off. That makes a difference. Secondly, it's that he is selling something that is especially Hawaii. It's a sense of I mean what I say, and I say what I mean. It takes us back to the great leaders post-statehood, John Burns and to some extent George Ariyoshi too. Quiet but effective. I'm not full of bombast and rhetoric. I just do the job. And my door is open, and I will talk to you, and I care about the people. And we haven't had that in a while.
We haven't had that attitude in a while. The idea of having a soft-spoken governor rather than a bombastic governor like Abercrombie, Fossey is another guy like Abercrombie.
He never got to be governor.
No, that's true. But it was the style of open-ended confrontation, and this is how I feel. Abercrombie was definitely that way. He was a very strong character, and he did remind me of Fossey. The one thing I go back to, Jay, and you didn't mention it, is I go back to when Abercrombie beat Mufi Hanneman. And Hanneman was backed by the Democratic Party. So we go back to several elections where the Democratic old guard, or whatever you want to call them, but I call them old guard, decided that Mufi should win, and then he did not win, and here comes Ige, and they're going to make sure that he's going to win. And they did what you said is correct. The most grassroots, coffee, tea, we'll meet at Starbucks, we'll meet at Zippy's, we'll do all that kind of stuff. They did that, and I think Abercrombie lost because of those two issues. I think that the cultural and the racial vote here is very, very strong. They're the ones who vote. And I heard a poll that came out that 72% of the Japanese people voted. That's much higher than all the rest put
So
together.
David Ige is culturally Japanese.
He is.
He's likable for anyone who is sympathetic with the Japanese culture.
Correct.
And,
And I think that his attitude and the way he showed himself to the public was exactly that. And they felt a kinship to him. They felt a direct connection to him. Where Abercrombie was that confrontational and tough,
Well,
and
he
that
hadn't
kind
connected.
of stuff. Yeah.
In fact, I would say, that his biggest problem, I was going to add this to the pot, his biggest problem is that, and this happened with Linda Lingle too, an organization existed around him at the time he started his first term, and her first term, but he didn't pay attention to them. He didn't curry favor with the very people who elected him. All his supporters, he was arrogant with them, and he lost them. They faded away. Not only mysterious things, but some, as you say, some in-your-face arrogant things, and they faded away. So by the time he was finished and he needed to run again, that organization didn't exist. In fact, people were angry with him for having, abandoned them. That's real serious. Linda Lingle did the same thing, but she slipped into the second term somehow. I think it was more accentuated for Abercrombie. And to me, there was nobody left to support him. And that, gives you the big
That
berth,
point spread.
the big point spread.
Right, that was
Because he was
amazing.
nobody there who
Right.
liked him anymore. He had alienated the people who supported him in the first place. This is a very deadly sin in Hawaii.
So what happens now? Iona is coming up, Mufi is coming up, and here is Ige. The polls are showing, and of course I was one of the guys who I thought the polls were absolutely wrong and it was going to be a very tight race. I thought it could go either way between Ige and Abercrombie. I had no idea it would double, basically. Now the polls are showing that under these circumstances, Iona might have a good chance to win. Is that possible that we would elect a Republican governor in this time frame where we saw how the Democratic machine stood behind one guy so strong, and the whole state is basically Democratic except for my friend Sam Sloan, who's out there. Sam, hello.
Hi, Sam.
But for me, I would find it hard to believe that the polls are right. What are your feelings?
Oh, I don't think Iona has a chance. He's Republican, and when he was in office, Linda Lingle gave him no real authority, no discretion. He was behind the scenes, and I think he actively mixed religion and government, having prayer meetings in the state capitol building. I still believe in the Establishment Clause myself, although I know it's been weakened. But for him to do that, and I can't think of a single thing he did in all his years in office that really was in any way notable. And people will have a hard time trying to find a persona about him, even if they are willing to, jump over to the Republican camp. I think the Republican, conduct in Washington, with the Cliff and what do you call that group?
Yeah, the Tea Party.
Tea Party group. I mean, it hasn't damaged Republicanism all over the country. Some places like it, but Hawaii doesn't like it. And I think a lot of people in Hawaii, even if they had a glimmer of liking Republicans, don't like Republicans now. Okay, and then there's the other thing about Mufi. I'll finish, and then you can close. Mufi really did some dirty tricks back there, and everybody knows about it. And he was nasty with people. He was really, really bad. And he lost the election because he presented that way. You couldn't like a guy who did the things he did. You couldn't believe in him. You'd never trust him. Okay? So now the question is whether the public, this is like George Santayana, whether the public remembers all of that or not. That's the only question as far as Mufi's concerned. Because if we were dealing with this election, his candidacy, 4 years ago, he would have gotten very few votes, and he did. Okay, now the question is whether people forgot in the past 4 years. Seymour, my answer is no, they did not forget. It's just not long enough to forget. Most people remember.
Well, I have to say, Jay, for the first time in the last hour, I'm in total agreement with you. I think it's a certainty that Ige will win in my mind. Iona, I don't think, has it. And Muffy is a very close personal friend. We used to play basketball together at the Y. I still have marks under my chin here from those elbows coming up and hitting me. But I paid you back, Muffy, if you remember. It was on that tennis court where I hit you right in the stomach. And he will remember that. But no, I think Muffy's going to have a hard road. A very, very difficult road. But our politics in this state, I have to say, business-wise, it's doing great. Everything is pointing upwards. This Kaka'ako fiasco was a fiasco when it came to Abercrombie and all that stuff. I don't really think he had that much to do with it. I think it's going to happen, and I think it's going to be a boon for the state when it comes to economics and business. I think from the standpoint of construction and all the other stuff, they'll solve the other issues about it. I did want to talk about one topic which we cannot bring up because we don't have time, is do we really need more tourists? Should this state decide we at 8 million tourists a year, we can only take that many, let's just do a better job for them?
The answer is no, Seymour. We don't need more tourists. We could do with less tourists.
Tell that.
We have to learn about self-reliance.
Tell that to Mr. Kelly, and tell that to all the other guys who are building more and more hotels. And
I
all
hope
that
they
stuff.
stop soon, because that's very detrimental to the state. And if you keep on doing that, we're going to wind up being a banana republic.
Let's talk about that at another date, because I think it's important to get the people to understand construction jobs are important. It's great to have a lot of people working in the hotel and the restaurant industry, but at some point in time, enough is enough. And I think we have to give them the service that they require. Right now, the latest survey on a Japanese poll was that there were hundreds of complaints about Hawaii service in the hotel industry. So maybe we have to look at the hotel industry as, let's make sure it's the best there is in the world, rather than to try to build more and more.
We agree completely on this.
Oh, geez, that's two tonight.
Yeah, sorry, I don't make you nervous.
I want to thank you all for listening and watching Seymour's World today. It was wonderful to have you, Jay. I just love when the two of us are together. And we're going to have a threesome pretty soon, aren't we? I think David is going to join us also, and we're going to talk about many different issues. And I think it's good. And I think I'll see what the interest is like when people send me their emails. But I hope they enjoyed it as much as we did. Next week we have a great show. We have the Kailua Bay Buddies here. They're a group of 3 musicians. They all have jobs. They're going to come and play, and they're going to talk to us about what they do in our community. And don't forget, with as bad as it is, with all the terrible things that are happening all over the world, there's a lot of good going on, and that's what we should be focusing on. Let's look at the positive side of life. I wish you all well. This is Seymor Kazimirski from Seymour's World at ThinkTech Hawaii. Aloha.